Norman.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I speak to the motion and specifically to the amendment in my name on the order paper. As the leader has said, the House has developed this, or successive administrations in collaboration with the House have supported across this chamber the development of the Independent Complaints and Grievance scheme. It was initiated in 2017 under the then Conservative government, and it's always been developed on a collaborative and cross-party basis. And in that context, it is a pity, Madam Deputy Speaker, indeed it is surprising and disappointing that the government should now be putting this business of the House motion when it has not been agreed in that collaborative and cross-party way, and indeed whipping its own members. This is highly unusual on a business of the House motion. Our position has always been that these matters should be worked through together through the usual channels and through other senior bodies of the House in a spirit of consensus. In that spirit, I will not be putting the amendment in my name to a vote. I'm very happy to take the amendment.
Thank you. I thank the honourable gentleman for giving way. I'm very concerned that the amendments put forward by the front bench opposite would fly in the face of the independents. So I'm glad to hear that he's not appointed to a vote, but can he confirm whether his party actually supports an independent process and supports the ICGS, or would they, if they were in government, make changes or even scrap it?
Very grateful to the Honourable Lady for the question. Of course, this is a Conservative body. In the first instance, it was developed on a cross-party basis, and there's nothing, as far as I'm aware, on my party that would make it anything other than a continued independent body in order to suppress and prevent the abuses that we're all familiar with and that occurred when it was brought and before it was brought into being. And it has been in many ways, it has not been without its problems, and of course it's in the nature of the House's deliberations and the secrecy associated and the privacy associated with these that we don't always hear about those problems, but it has, broadly speaking, been successful. But of course, that means that there is no problem that this motion, as it is developed, and the point of conflict between my side of the House and the leader's side, there's no problem that this motion is seeking to address and cure. Let me explain in more detail. As the motion lays out, the issue is not about policy as it's framed, but supposedly about procedure. And of course, the Assurance Board, as it lays out, has many members. It's not by any means simply composed of parliamentarians. It includes clerk assistants of both houses, members of both houses, but on a nominated rather than elected basis, the Parliamentary Commissioner for Standards, lay member of the House of Lords Conduct Committee, members of the Human Resources teams of both houses, of course. The proposal now is that this body should be able to set rules for members of this House without the House itself having any say in the matter. So this is not about the content of the policy of the board, it's about the question of what say the House has in relation to rules that are being set for everyone affected by the ICGS, but in particular members of this House. It is therefore nonsense to suggest that, and it's in particular nonsense to suggest that it is difficult or need involve any delay to lay a motion of the House as we have suggested. Our position is extremely simple, that there should be a motion before the House to approve or disapprove any decision taken by the Assurance Board. And of course, those motions can be laid in a very short period of time, literally in a day or two, perhaps even under some circumstances overnight. And therefore, there can be no proper suggestion of a delay in the implementation of decisions made by the Assurance Board, and therefore no reason, at least in my judgment and the judgment of my colleagues, as to why this should not be a matter for the House to decide. Yes, of course.
It is extremely surprising that the honourable gentleman takes this position, given that generally his party is associated with deregulation and removing bureaucracy. What he is describing is a situation, does he not agree, that actually creates additional bureaucracy around independent organisation?
That's not true. The motions of this House are not traditionally regarded as a form of bureaucracy. In fact, in many ways, they cut through bureaucracy because they allowed us to get to a decision, a democratically ratified decision, very quickly and transparently. Of course, the trouble comes when you have decisions that are made which do not have that transparency and do not have that simplicity and speed of action. And that is what we are opposed to. Now, as I've said, the present proposals draw a distinction between policy and procedure and would mandate the Assurance Board to act on its own behalf in matters of procedure. But of course, the Board only contains one member of the House of Commons, and that person is nominated rather than elected, as I have said, by the House. In other words, the Assurance Board potentially has wide-ranging and potentially coercive powers, and those powers are almost entirely to be exercised by people outside any direct framework of democratic accountability, potentially to overturn decisions made by, in their final effects, made by an MP's constituents at the ballot box. The House has rightly been concerned about the exercise of such powers for at least 400 years. The motion, too, draws a distinction between policy and procedures. Procedure, of course, includes, contrary to the suggestion that's been made, important substantive matters. Indeed, the reviewer, Paul Kernahan, set out an illustrative table of potential changes. They included changing whether somebody may be accompanied to an ICGS interview. And I've pointed out that this, of course, is an issue of powers as well as procedure. The Assurance Board has the ability to empower people under review by the ICGS to bring another person along to an interview or to prevent them from doing so. This, in turn, reflects a tacit or explicit policy decision about what may be fair or just under the circumstances. It's not simply a matter of procedure. Mr. Kernahan's review also included, as an illustration of what he called procedure, changing the timing of when the Parliamentary Standards Commission is notified of a misconduct complaint, whether that may be before or after an initial assessment. But of course, this too reflects a tacit policy judgment about what a just process would be. These tacit policy judgments show that there is no hard and fast distinction to be drawn here between policy and procedure, and they underline that these are matters not for officials, not for unelected people, but for members of this House acting through this House. ICGS sets rules, let it be, may I remind the House, not merely for members of Parliament, but for 15,000 plus pass holders, and even, although this matter is slightly unclear and has not properly been resolved in my judgment, for tourists and visitors to the Palace of Westminster. It is not accountable to any other body. The decision today to reject Amendment E, and of course we're not moving it, but so that will be the decision, will be a one-off decision to give up these powers of scrutiny that will be hard, if not impossible, to reverse once yielded, at a time when more and more decisions are being taken by people who are not accountable in any direct, genuinely democratic way through the emergence of what people have often thought of as a kind of bureaucratic or legal sludge. This is absolutely deplorable. All we have said on our side is that any decision that should be, in this case, should be taken by people that is taken by people who are not members of Parliament should be placed before this House in line with its constitutional status and the Bill of Rights 1689. That it has always been our procedure in this House not to recognise a superior, let alone a bureaucratic or undemocratic elected superior, and we should not be doing so in this occasion. Of course, I'm happy to give way.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman, and I should note for the record that I'm proud to serve on the Modernisation Committee, and I also, in my previous role before coming into this place, gave evidence to Paul Kernahan as part of my previous role, so I just thought I'd put that on the record. I'm listening to the Right Honourable Gentleman carefully, and I'm just struggling slightly to understand this point that he's drawing, and I point to what I understand might be the latest version of the Constitution of the Conservative Party, but I can't be sure on that because, unlike the Labour Party, the Conservative Party don't regularly publish theirs online, but I'm looking at one from 2021. And in the respect of the section dealing with ethics, disciplinary investigations and so on, the governing committee, as I understand it, of the Conservative Party then empowers an ethics and integrity committee, which is an independent committee empowered to determine conduct and if rules are broken, which is made up of a host of independent QCs and also the chair of the 1922 committee. One part of this, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it goes to the point that the Right Honourable Gentleman was mentioning, is at 82.1 it says that committee will be the master of its own procedure. So if it's good enough for the Conservative Party, why is it not that same principle? Why should that not apply to us in this House?
I mean, if I may say so, I don't know what capacity the gentleman gave evidence to Paul Kernahan, but that extraordinarily misconceived idea. This House is a democratically elected chamber. It has been the constitutional doctrine of the United Kingdom for hundreds of years that it should have no superior. That is what we are contesting now. What may or may not be the case in some other body, which he's dragged into this conversation in a way that I'm afraid rather breaches the spirit of cross-party discussion that we're having. What should may or may not be the case, I'm surprised you allowed it, Madam Deputy Speaker, since it's so obviously irrelevant to these discussions. But what may or may not be the case with any other party is frankly completely irrelevant, because they're not, in the sense we're describing, a legislative body democratically elected by the people of this country.